Welcome to In Studio from Simply Timeless. I'm your host, Jay Daniels. Many of us find ourselves spending a bit more time at home these days. Just before things got a little crazy in the world, I spent a day in Midtown Manhattan, and there I had the opportunity to meet with my good friend, Taeko Fukao. She's originally from Japan, but her love for jazz and soul music brought her here to the United States. Her most recent album is called Contemplation, titled after the McCoy Tyner tune. Taeko and I chatted as we walked along Broadway. Please pardon the traffic. To share her story, here's Taeko Fukao.
I heard, Japanese pop music, but some special thing about my family was that my father liked singing traditional Shiga special, folk music. It's called the Goshu Ondo. And his father liked it, so he started learning that art form around maybe his 30s, when I was maybe 5 or 6. So he always was practicing that singing in a bathroom or, around the house, walking around, memorizing lyrics. And maybe his master came to our house to teach and hold a class to a few students. I just listened to those, and he was on a summer festival sometimes, and so we all went to listen, and that's something that I just had naturally and grew up listening to. And also, I don't know if you know an instrument called Koto, Koto.
No, I don't. What is a koto then?
It's a Japanese 13 strings harp that you put on the floor. You sit down and pluck with your 3 fingers on the right, and you bend the notes with the left hand. It's called a koto. And our house was, one of the rooms was rented to a koto lesson. And every Saturday, a koto teacher came to hold a class. So our students came in to study with her. And my parents thought, I might as well take some lessons every Saturday. So that went on for about 2 years. Again, that was when I was about 5 and 6 years old. And then the koto teacher had some family issues, and she had to stop the class. So my koto life ended. But that was my first instrument. That was koto. And it's not really common, but somehow that was my case.
Now, do you still play the koto from time to time?
Funny thing is, my koto life ended, but then about maybe 6 years ago, my mother started playing koto with her local friends, but then she quit after 2 years, and the koto was laying around the house. And one day, about 2 years ago, I said, you know what, I'm going to start practicing this. So a few decades later, right, I brought that back to New York City. And now it's been 2 years that I've been practicing. And
would you say that you've gotten good at it again?
I'm working at it. Since I had by now I have a basis for the music theory and, understanding. So I think I'm a little bit quicker to learn it, but still, my teacher is a really fantastic koto player who is from Japan also, but who lives in Queens, and she's very, very articulate about what she wants to hear, which is wonderful, but it was very difficult. And so I'm happy that I'm working with her, and I have a long way to go.
But see, that's the joy of the journey, though.
Yeah.
You always have somewhere to go.
Yes.
And you never stop learning along the way. And soul music especially has played an important role in your life. You had the traditional music of Japan growing up from your mom and dad.
Right.
But it wasn't as though they necessarily wanted you to become a full-time musician.
No, not at all. They just didn't have any arts in their mind at all. Growing up, I was more maybe do some, admin work, or maybe law or accounting, something like that. But I always loved music and the painting and all these arts that my parents didn't really pick up on. And I promised myself that, one day I'll start singing. Maybe when I go to college, and maybe I'll find some friends or a music circle, and that's what I did.
And you still do some painting as well.
Here and there. I would like to do more, really.
Just like with the koto, you could do some more work on it, I suppose.
Right. Right now I'm working on koto and my piano and music. But I will add painting at some point, maybe in the next couple of years. Definitely.
So, contrary to what some people might think, there's actually quite a bit of American pop music heard in Japan.
Oh yeah.
What were some of the things that you heard when you were younger from the States that really impacted your love of this music?
There was a radio station, maybe there still is, from Kobe or Osaka, in the big cities. Where I lived in Japan was more of a countryside called Shiga, but still we were able to listen to FM radios from these cities, and there was like the top 40 or top 100 kind of radio programs that aired American hits. So I was listening to the hits, maybe Mr. Big or Roxette or those kind of things.
She's Got the Look was one of my favorite songs, yeah.
And Mariah Carey, was a big thing on me, and I started to practicing. Bought her album and just imitate it without really knowing what the song was about.
Coming from Japan to the States was quite a journey for you. It all began, I suppose one of the first steps was spending some time in Michigan.
Yeah, I was in Michigan, Grand Rapids, Michigan for 2 weeks for studying abroad. And, it was a nice experience. But in the meantime, I was taken to a movie theater, local movie theater, just to see a movie called The Commitments. And that's a movie about Irish people playing soul music, and that was my encounter to soul music. Who knew? Irish people was my way into black music. And
I haven't heard too many stories like that.
Then I came home and I promised myself, like, this is what I'm gonna do when I go to college, without letting my parents know. And I went to college and majored in law, but I joined the music circle. And that music circle was more into jazz and maybe soul music on the side. So I just started to form a band, soul band, with those, horn players from jazz band. and that's what I did 4 years, all 4 years in college.
What do you think are some of the differences between jazz and soul music?
I thought soul music was very, very soulful and more like, had lots of energy. And jazz that I heard back then in Japan was more intellectual, and I really wasn't able to get myself involved in it, and I couldn't understand it. But when I came to the States, New York, and listened to jazz, the jazz and soul was the same. Both was soul music. It was very soulful.
So you went to college. Where did you go to school at?
Kyoto.
And what was your major in at Kyoto?
Business laws.
That's a far cry from being in jazz.
And I have a license for real estate laws. I'm somewhat a lawyer in Japan, not here. But, law was law. I thought that then whatever you do in life, you encounter some legal things, whether you walk on the escalator or, you just walk and get hit by a car, whatever you do, So I thought that maybe it's okay to do it. But my heart wasn't so much into it. And music was something I really loved. But I didn't think that I would be a professional musician, because that's something that just was nowhere in the house as an idea. My parents didn't think so. I didn't think so even. But what happened was my brother passed when I was in the second grade at college. And I didn't know what to do. I continued to study law and sang for the third grade. In the fourth grade, I started to study for a bar exam as a real estate lawyer. And I passed it, around the fourth grade. My professor at the time spoke to me a little bit, and then he figured, I really like music. So he suggested me, after passing this exam, why don't you just go to New York for a little bit? So that was like it.
And you had never been to New York?
No, I had no idea. I just didn't even know the Statue of Liberty is somewhere on the island. I just had no idea. But I thought, that's a good idea. So that gave me a strength to even work harder towards the bar exam. And I passed it one-time shot. Then I told my parents I want to go to New York. And everybody flipped and started really angry, become angry because my brother has passed. I'm the only kid left. I was already early 20s. And in early 20s in Japan, you are supposed to settle. But I wasn't ready. So I fought with my parents for maybe 3 or 4 months. Everybody, relatives and everybody came down to my house to stop me, and I had to really, really think. And in the end, I thought, you know what, if I didn't do this now, and if I turn 50, and I must say, like, if I'm wealthy and doing well, but then if I go to a jazz bar or something, and if I saw a little girl trying to sing, I would regret what I didn't do. So I just couldn't let that thought go, and you know what, I just had to go. And after all, my father gave me an okay for 6-month stay in New York. So I prepared my visa and came to the States, and that was 1998, and that's more than 20 years ago.
Has it already been that long?
Yes. And that was, supposed to be 6 months. I stayed in New York for 6 months, and I walked around everywhere and went to every club, and I was just trying to observe New York City inside of me over 6 months. And I was gonna go back, and which I really did. And I went back to Japan, and I was in Osaka for about a year and working for a law firm and singing around in local clubs and in Kyoto and Osaka. But then, the music I heard in New York City over this 6 months was really, like I said, it really soulful, and I was moved by it. And somehow I couldn't get that in Japan. And also, I felt a lot of things here in my heart, but I couldn't. What I did was I went back to Japan without learning how to create it, or even knowing how to judge if it's good or not. If somebody in Japan, maybe a piano player, may tell me something that I'm doing wrong. But I wouldn't be able to judge back then if he was right or wrong, because I had no skill or knowledge about it. So after all, I decided to come back to New York City to study this art form, and at least until when I know if it's good music or bad music, or just have some knowledge. And that was, I think, the second coming back to New York. Second time, to come back to New York was the best decision I've ever made in my life, and since then I'm here. I'm still learning, and I still cannot go back.
But you still keep in touch with your family?
Of course, because my brother has passed and my parents miss me. So I made myself a promise that I would go back to Japan at least twice a year. And of course, every time I go back, they yell at me and they tell me when I will return. So always an argument. But then after all, I decided to just do some gigs in Japan, so I have something to look forward to, not just to be yelled at. So I started to book some shows in Japan, and that started to become maybe I'll do a gig in Kyoto, and maybe I'll do a gig in Osaka the next time, and after the 6 months, maybe I'll do a gig in Tokyo. And I started to expand it, and that became after doing that for 7-8 years, 15 shows throughout the country for 3 weeks or something like that. So and I started to make a lot of friends throughout the country, so it gave me good things by promising myself to go to see my parents twice a year.
And I think that you would be honest in saying that when you do these performances, even though it does involve a lot of work and learning the songs and learning how you want to interpret these songs, rehearsing with the band, would you say though that it's just a natural expression of who you are at this point?
It's definitely not a work, and I enjoy it. And this is what I love to do. And New York City taught me you just got to do what you love to do. And that wasn't taught in Japan. So discovering the way of living was one of the best thing I learned and discovered in New York. And with music, you have to be honest. And the fact that I can be honest is so revelating, and I love it.
But you didn't just find your passion. You didn't find your musical, I guess, your musical calling here in New York. But you also have a family here in New York. Is that right?
Right. I have a 6-year-old daughter. She just turned 6 on March 3rd, and she's lovely. And my husband is very supportive, so I get to still do music. He told me when she was about to be born, I asked my husband, maybe I should, stop my music for a while. And my husband said, maybe I shouldn't stop. I should slow down but continue. And that was, he comes to the, from that aspect, and I really, really appreciate that. So I get to raise my child, have a family here and over in Japan, my parents, and continue my passion, music.
Now, is he involved in music as well?
No, he's a listener.
but that's just as good, though.
Yeah, I love that fact. I love the fact that he's a music appreciator, but not a musician.
Did you have any of your own struggles coming here and beginning to find your way in this new society? I mean, it's a different culture, I would think.
It's a different culture. So when I came here, I wasn't determined to be a musician. I just needed to get out of Japan for a couple of years. And I was thinking to return to Japan to be a part of that society and maybe be a lawyer, work, and, be with my parents. I didn't have a solid idea, but that was a vague idea. But living in New York and people around here, by watching them and talking with them and studying with them, I started to realize that, I could follow my dream, and this is my life. I have to be, I have to control. I have a control of my own life, and started to give me different ideas. So after doing that for 10 years, while keep thinking to return to Japan, but I still didn't find the way to return to Japan. So I somehow was in New York. And after those 10 years, finally, I released my first album in 2007, One Love. And that's the moment, and that's the year I determined that I would do this music professionally and for the rest of my life. So it took me a good 10 years to come to that decision.
And I take it that's your dream, is to share this music with the world.
Yeah, definitely, until I die. And that doesn't change, and that will not change. No matter what the rest of the people say. And the funny thing is, in 2008, after a year from my debut album release, I had a big show in Japan, right? And a lot of friends of my father used to tell me, like, Taeko, we understand you love to do what you love to do, but parents are waiting for you. You should come back. That's the comments I kept listening to. But in 2008, after I brought back my first album, and I was determined to be a professional, continue to live by singing and doing music. They felt that vibe, and after the show, they felt really good about this, and they came to me and held my hand and said, Taeko, good luck with your music, and we always encourage you to do this. And that was okay, now the wind is a follow wind. It was always against me, but now people are having my back.
What do you think that you've been able to gain personally? They often say that jazz music, especially, is a spiritual experience. Like, one finds more of themselves through this musical experience. And I know what you are trying to deliver to your audiences, but what is it that you are able to gain from the music when you discover those things?
Power and love and healing. And after all, it's all, human. We conversate through music and we communicate. And I love people, period, So some people maybe wants to be alone, but I love being among people. And so I guess that the power that we create in the room together with the audience, and the band and me, everybody, that's what I always look for, if that's the question you were asking me.
You were talking about some of the artists that really did impact you. In fact, some have compared you to one of my favorite vocalists, Anita Baker, from the 1980s. But you were talking about Aretha Franklin, Stevie Wonder. What is it from their songs that inspires you the most?
They're soulful, and they hit you hard. When you listen, you can tell they're not showing off. They're not being fake. They're so honest, and they move you, and you can really relate to what they're saying. And that's the feeling I would love for my audience to have also.
So their story, through their songs, has become your story too.
Yeah, definitely. And I always try to learn from the great artists. I try to go to listen to other artists' shows as much as possible, because with a little one in a household, my hanging habit has changed quite a bit. But still, when my husband allows, I try to go out and listen to great artists.
You were talking about this journey, always growing, always learning. What is at least one thing that you wish you could do better than you're doing now?
Maybe organizing my time well, maybe prioritizing my, thing well, right? But sometimes I have like a whole bunch of things, and funny, I was so busy one month, but when I just had one night, I was just knitting with my daughter on my knees, and she was just falling asleep, and I started knitting, and I just kept knitting for 3 hours, and everything else was just out the window for that moment. It was kind of funny. It was healing, but then I just laughed at myself what I was doing. Or sometimes there are many things, but then you kind of start focusing on one thing, and or start practicing. Practice is always good, but sometimes I really have to prioritize. So I say, for example, January, I made a calendar and put 4 things: piano practice, Koto practice, voice practice, and Koto practice. Or maybe I said that gym, going to gym and work out. So then I started tracking. Maybe I'll continue that. I didn't do that in February, but it's good to have a record and see it. So I'll be better.
What do you hope from your own musical experiences? What do you hope your daughter might be able to learn from that? I mean, she may not take music as her own path, but through your example and through your performances and through your diligence, what do you hope she takes away from that?
First, she loves music and she loves dancing, and we haven't sent her to any lessons, but somehow she does it so well. And we are afraid that she might become another musician or dancer or in an art form, and we won't stop her if she heads that direction. And if he chooses other things, that's also good. But answering your question, something I want her to take is her mother, came out from Japan and here in New York City did something that she really loved to do and continued on it no matter what kind of resistance she had. She just kept doing it. And you just gotta do what you love to do. And that's you owe it to yourself. And that's something I want her to know.
Final question. Out of all the things in life you could have done, why music?
I love singing. I love music. I love sharing. I love tones. I love notes. I love instruments. I just couldn't think of anything else. And it gives me joy, and it gives people joy. And as to the last question, it has to, what you do has to be based on joy. to be successful in anything, whether it's a business or MBA, being a lawyer, doctor, or music or dance, whether it has to come from joy. It has to be based on joy. And music gives me joy.
Taeko Fukao, our in-studio guest this week from Simply Timeless. Her website is Songbird Taeko. I'll spell her name for you. It's Taeko, songbirdtaeko.com. My sincere thanks to her for taking the time to meet with me and explore a bit of Midtown. All the best to you and your family, Taeko. Stay healthy. And I wish that for you and yours this week, too. Until we meet again, I'm Jade Andrews, thanking you for joining us in studio.